Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Adrinda Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of Nola, Black Education for New Orleans. And I am so excited to welcome you to tonight's virtual panel discussion, Women in Education, Progressive Action and Impact in New Orleans. Tonight's conversation is hosted by the Inspire Nola Charter Network in honor of Women's History Month. And tonight's topic is near and dear to my heart. My organization is led by two Black women. The experiences of women, particularly women of color in leadership, is something that we live every day. And, you know, there's quite a lot in that. And we're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about the glory. We're going to talk about the sisterhood. We're also going to talk about some of the challenges, some of the obstacles. And I'm really thrilled about the panel that we have pulled together for this evening's discussion. Before I introduce the panel, I want to introduce the Chief Academic Officer of Inspire Nola Charter Schools, Dr. Wylene Saraparu, who's going to share a brief greeting.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. On behalf of Inspire Nola Charter Schools, this is an important moment in time for us. First of all, it's Women's History Month. For those who have not celebrated, please lift yourselves up. We are very proud of the work that we do each and every day. But secondly, and more important, there are some trailblazers that are going to speak this evening. And also, you know, in terms of just making sure that we collaborate and hear for what it is that we do each and every day for students and scholars, that is going to be the impactful piece of everything that you're going to hear about tonight. And so for Inspire Nola, we want to continue the transformational impact that we have in the community. And so we thought it important to bring women who are in power to empower other women. And so more than just the educational impact that they're going to discuss, we are coming together as one united front that our leadership does matter, we matter, and what we do is very influential. And so thank you to everyone here who's joined together tonight. I am hoping we learn a lot. We continue to collaborate and we continue to make sure that education is the biggest priority that we have in front of us. So thank you, Ms. Kelly, and thank you all for joining Inspire Nola in a great presentation and panel discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saraparu. I couldn't have said it better. You know, women in leadership, women of color in leadership, we matter. And I wasn't kidding when I said I was very excited about this conversation. When I saw the panel lineup, I was literally fangirling. I feel very lucky to call the women on this panel friends, colleagues, partners. They've certainly supported me, supported my org, and we've had a chance to show up in support of the incredible work that each of them are doing and that they're going to talk a little bit more about tonight. And so with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. To begin, today we have in alphabetical order, Ms. Melanie Askew, the founder and chief executive officer of Elan Academy. Dr. Latoya Brown, the chief executive officer of Audubon Charter School. Dr. Rashida Govin, the executive director of the New Orleans Youth Alliance and the founder and executive director of Project Butterfly New Orleans. Dr. Wakwana Lewis, executive director of curriculum and instruction for Inspire Nola Charter Schools. Ms. Alexina Medley, Principal and Chief Executive Officer Emeritus of Warren Eastern Charter School. Ms. Mary Moran, the Executive Director and co-founder of Our Voice, Nuestra Voice. Ladies, welcome. It's so good to have you here tonight. I'm really excited to get into our conversation. I want to share that the women on the panel have obviously all earned their accolades and their honorifics, and they have graciously given me permission to steward our conversation using our first names. And so we'll be referring to each other using our first names throughout the conversation tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started. One of the things that BNOLA does every month is we convene a group of Black women educators for a design studio where they have a chance to talk about their place in this work. And so to begin, I want to borrow something that we do in that space to just kind of set the atmosphere for our discussion today. I want to start with the following question. What is your earliest memory of womanhood? And I want everyone to respond to that question concisely. Please speak for no more than a minute. But please share your earliest memory of womanhood, and you can take that in whatever direction you like. I'll start with Mary, and then we'll hear from Alexina, Raquana, Rashida, Latoya, and Mel. So Mary, you got it. What's your earliest memory of womanhood?
Wow. Just out the gate. Well, good evening, everyone. Greetings, and thank you so much for having me. I would say, I was raised by my grandmother, and she was nearly 80 when I was born. And so I think just having an elder who raised me, and a woman and the matriarch of our family, while she carried a lot of divine masculine energy, actually, her womanhood penetrated throughout our family. And so she was hardcore. And I think her kind of daily rearing of my brother and I just really allowed me to understand both the ancient kind of sense of what it means to be a woman, everything from what we know as Mother Earth, but also kind of the lineage in which we came from in our family. And so yeah, I'm grateful for her.
What's her name?
Her name is Julia.
Julia. Thank you, Mary.
Yes.
Alexina?
Well, that's a good afternoon. Good evening, I should say. That's a hard act to follow, Mary, with such a gracious grandmother. But when I think about things, I think about, I'm the youngest of 4 children and the only girl. But my mother was a very, very strong woman that when she spoke, you listen. And she commanded your attention. She was, I think, the eldest of 9 children. And there were only 2 girls, but she outlived many of her siblings. So she was around for a long time. And surprisingly, she seldom went anywhere. She didn't drive, but everybody came to our house for advice, and she knew everything that went on. And sometimes you look back and say, in this age of technology, what would we have done then? I think my mother would have known more about what's going on than we do with the technology. And for reasons is that she has taught me that you communicate, you talk to people, you get involved. And those are some of the strong characteristics that I think that I follow today.
I love that. I love that. Let's hear from Laquana, your earliest memory of womanhood.
Good evening, everyone, and it's so good to be here. I'm kind of like Ms. Medley in a sense that I can cleanly remember I was around 4 or 5 years old. You can't tell from the Zoom, but I'm very tall in height. And I also had a grandmother who was very tall. And one thing she showed me, one day I walked in and I was kind of hunched over, and she was like, women stand with their shoulders back, their spine straight. And it just, from that moment on, she was like, when you walk into a room, you walk into the room with your head held high, and you just walk in with this posture like you belong there. And that's just something that I've always carried with me, even into my adulthood. So that's like my first memory of knowing how a woman should show up into a room and into a space.
Love that. So many examples of strong female role models. And I, similar to you, Laquana, remember an early lesson in how I needed to comport myself, how I needed to show up. What about you, Rashida, another tall woman on the panel tonight?
Yes, that resonates with me on a lot of levels. But I just actually I called my twin before this to ask her, like, how do I answer this question? And we talked about like watching my mother and how she moved in the world, but also watching all the women folk in my family. So my mother is one of 5 girls, and she has 5 brothers also. So my grandmother has 10 children. My grandmother's super tiny. She's passed now, but she's the matriarch of our family. And when we thought about like our first memory of womanhood, we thought about the women folk in my family at holidays. So it's like, that is a scene to behold, right? These 5 women in the kitchen, wrangling children, giving orders, like, coordinating it's usually like 70 something people at Thanksgiving. It's like immediate family. It's like a lot of us. But watching them in action and watching how the men defer to them. The men in my family are very strong men, but they absolutely defer to their sisters out of a tremendous amount of respect. All of the women in my family are leaders in their families, leaders in their careers. They're people that folks come to get advice. That resonated with me as well. And I just remember wanting to be like my grandmother, who was this petite woman, but who was in charge of all of us, right? But who also loved on everybody. Like, everybody who came in there felt like they mattered. So I carry a lot of that, with me, as a woman.
Mm. And I know you and your twin have very different personalities, so it's interesting that y'all both went to that, those memories of of the holidays. What about you, Latoya? Earliest memory of womanhood.
I think my earliest impression of womanhood was this is apparently a very hard job to do. And I think about it because I reflect on my mother and all the things she seemed to do or accomplish within the course of a day. So although she held a full-time job, when she came home, she also, cleaned the house, made dinner, made sure that we did our homework, made sure we took our baths, got us down to bed, straightened up the house at the end of the day. Whereas when my dad came home, he came home and he ate dinner, and that was pretty much all he was responsible for the rest of the night. And I can just remember thinking about just the difference between their two roles in our nuclear family. And I was like, man, it must be really easy to be the man of the house because, once you get home, you're done. But for the woman, it seemed like her job was just never over. And, and reflecting on this question, was I thinking only about my mother? But then I said no, because when I think about the role that I've seen my aunts play, my sister, my older cousins, other women that I know, they all have similar stories and they share similar, roles within their families. They're the nucleus of the family. They're the brains behind the machine of a family. So for me, the earliest reflection of womanhood is it's a really tough job. So it takes a really special person to do it and do it well.
Yeah, it really makes that statement or that saying that we hear sometimes, the weaker sex. It's not applicable. What about you, Mel? Earliest memory of womanhood.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having me. My earliest memory of womanhood, for me, I think about the fact that I have 5 brothers and I'm the baby girl. I have a sister as well. But when I was younger and they would want to roughhouse and play, I would always remember my mom saying, y'all are being too rough with her. Y'all are being too rough with her. And so when I think of my mom and my grandmother, they both have this ability to be gentle, but also that strength that you all described within your lineages. And so those Rufus women, they were strong or still are strong, but they also broke that barrier of, okay, women have to be silent. Like when you had an opinion, you had to have, or if you had a statement, you had to have your reasons why behind it. They would always ask you, why do you think that? Why do you think that? And I believe they were preparing me to walk into rooms as a woman, as an adult, and to be able to defend myself anytime that I had something to say. And so breaking that barrier of silence.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all for sharing that. And I think we can already hear, some of the themes in these, first memories of womanhood experiences that are relevant to our experiences as women leaders in educations in a complex city like New Orleans. And so I can definitely see the connection, and I'm excited to dig in further. One of the things, that I'll just put out there to kind of set up the next question, women are very, very highly represented in the education workforce nationally, right? Nearly 80% of people who work in K-12 education are women. Now we're going to talk about, what happens in terms of leadership pipeline, but the fact is we have a lot of women who are working in education. And so I'm curious, I would love to hear a few of you share more about your personal journeys that inspired you to choose education as a career. For example, Mel, I know growing up in St. Louis, you've had some pretty formative experiences growing up that helped shape your decision to become an educator. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes. For me, when I graduated from college, I felt I had a moment of reflection, like why me? And it brought me back to the fact that when my father passed my 8th grade year, my mom utilized the Social Security funding and sent me to a college prep private school, and college was the only option. And so I looked at that like my golden ticket. But looking back, my father should not have had to pass for me to have a high quality education. So how do we change and erase this system that has contributed to failing schools? It's when I learned that it wasn't just a St. Louis problem, it's a problem across the country for Black and Brown students. And so I saw people starting schools, but how do we ensure that the leaders of these schools also are reflective of the scholars that are in those schools? How are we creating high quality education programming that we shouldn't have to pay for? That should be our educational right. And so my own experiences led me to education to create Align Academy, where parents do not have to pay for high quality education. Let's create generational wealth instead of spending it on tuition.
I love that. I know that not everyone on the panel knew that education was going to be the career path that you would take. Alexina, your reputation is tremendous in our education space in New Orleans. And I know you came to education kind of in a roundabout way. You started off studying pharmacy. Is that right?
That's right.
What shifted you to want to work in education?
Well, I did pharmacy for a while. I got a certificate I went to Xavier. Then I left Xavier and I went back home and to the Bahamas, and I got a certificate in pharmacy in which I worked in the hospital. But I saw that things were not going because at that time, you in hospital pharmacy, you did all your compounding and everything yourself, packaging your pills and those sort of things. But that was going to the manufacturers. And I realized that I felt very, very comfortable interfacing with the patient. And the patient felt comfortable to say, I didn't tell the doctor this, but can you call the doctor and say such and such? And then I realized that, a lot of our people want to say, but don't know what to say or how to say it in order to advance themselves or for the betterment of themselves and their children. And then I thought I said, I came back here to New Orleans and I volunteered in Gerttown for a while and decided that I want to go into education. Everybody was angry with me at home because they felt, pharmacy paid, and, everybody, as I was told, everybody who couldn't do anything became a teacher. And I said, that's not true. If you really want to do that, and my sister-in-law, my oldest sister-in-law was a teacher. If you really want to make a difference, teaching is where you start. And I feel as though that over the years, although I came out in elementary education, never taught in an elementary school, did special education, went into that in the middle and the junior high level, and then went to high school. But I felt as though that taking kids where they are and showing them that there are ways in which they can make themselves what they want to be, and to help the family in the same time or the same way was what gave me inner peace, made me happy. And I think when you're happy and you like what you're doing, you do it well. And I loved what I was doing.
That spark lit up when you were working with children. I can relate to what you said about recognizing that you needed to make a shift when you realized how much you enjoyed the patient-facing work. I similarly had a first career in a totally different field, but felt like I wanted to be much closer to the people who were, you know, working with the material, with the books that I was publishing. So I really relate to that. And I know that there are other folks on our panel who, like me, work in education, but in a non-traditional way, right? We're not school-based. I'm not a principal. I've never been a teacher, but I lead an organization that supports principals, schools, and teachers. And so I'd love to hear from Mary and Rashida, just can you share a little bit more about your journey to working in education, and specifically, you know, leading the education support and education advocacy organizations that you lead? You guys, I know you as researchers, I know you as organizers, I know you as people who bring a wide spectrum of skills to your work. So can you tell me a little bit about what led you to lead the work that you do at your organizations? And Rashida or Mary, you can start. I know the smile, I know this exchange. Rashida's going in.
Well, first of all, I have all of my degrees in education. Like my undergrad is in elementary ed, my master's is in college student personnel. So it's an MED to prepare us to serve college students on the student affairs side. And then my doctorate is in ed leadership, and my focus was on pre-K through higher education. So what brought me into the industry is chance encounter. No, my mom is an educator. My mother is a lifelong educator who has also like opened 2 charter schools. At the end of her career, she's on the board of one of them now. Like my mom is my shero, point blank. But I was determined not to do anything that she did. I was like, nah, like I don't want to go to your school. I went to her school. I didn't like, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to major in what you majored in. I majored in what she majored in. So what happened was I actually went to college thinking that I was going to work in communications, specifically television, broadcasting, and production. I had an interest in developing children's television because when I was growing up, I felt like media was having a really significant impact on Black and brown children. And I felt like we did not have enough positive imagery. And the content was just really poor. And I was like, if I can make that type of impact, that's what I want to do. However, I was also raised in a home where I was allowed to watch TV 1 hour a week. That was, yeah, wow. My mom didn't play. That was Cosby Show in different world. Wow. So when I went to college and actually took my first comms class and we had to watch TV, like every day, I was like, bro, I can't, this is not, I don't watch TV. I can't do this. And I realized like, okay, education is calling me, like, because the impact that I want to make is on young people. And so I went into that industry and really loved it. What I loved about it though, is that it was a liberatory space, right? Like I could bring in every skill, every interest I had into the classroom and use it to impart information on children, to get them excited about education. Like I could bring in music and art and anything, like to just reach them. I loved it. What I experienced though in schools were the things that I experienced when I was in school. The things that made learning less engaging, less fun, hyper political. Like, you know, every other year it's a new reading program. And so you're starting all over again from whatever the district. And I was so disenchanted with that. I felt like it took so much away from what made the space so liberatory, what made it possible for us to reach children. And I decided I wanted to step away. So I ended up working in higher education for 10 years. So I did college admissions work, a bunch of other stuff. But I realized that I really loved teaching. And so I found ways to teach no matter what. So whether I was teaching the history of our institution or teaching collegiate courses, undergrads and graduates, like I ended up in the classroom no matter what. What I found though is that in the second half of my career, which has been in nonprofits, what I discovered is that there are many ways to engage in education work outside of classrooms, traditional classroom spaces. That learning is happening everywhere. I felt my freest in these spaces that I was able to shape and mold, that I could reach the entire family. So I have trained parents. I have done research on education to help advance policy or to help enlighten community about what is happening in schools and give them the tools they need to advocate for themselves. And right now, my focus at the New Orleans Youth Alliance is to train folks that are working outside of the classroom with the skills that they need to show up at their best for our children, to shape rich learning spaces for children outside of the classroom and to help them to be good partners with schools. But also from a liberatory standpoint, like what I knew is that I could and have a liberty to do whatever I wanted in terms of what I could teach. So I'm teaching about healing justice, right? Like how do you dismantle and disrupt these institutions that are harmful to our children? How do we impart or use culture, our culture, to support their learning and development of children? How do I unpack the trauma that you as an educator have experienced, but also help you to support children in processing their trauma and learning the skills they need to actually be strengthened from these experiences, and also like transform the institutions that are harming them and the communities that can bring them harm. So I have found and fallen in love with the freedom that I experience outside of schools. Although I love schools, I love the freedom that I have to bring all the things I learned in my education training into that space to really support the entire community.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we say all the time, particularly as a community of color, you know, we are only as strong as our village. And what I hear you saying is that it is the work that you're doing to be part of that village and to bring like a supportive ecosystem around schools and children and educators that really appeal to you. And Mary, I know you hold an incredible set of work that is parent facing as an organizer and as someone, you know, who's a strong parent advocate in our space. What led you to that particular kind of work in education?
Yeah, I think I was thinking, I was like, okay, this is what I usually say, but I think ultimately it was really just me as a child supporting my parents and trying to do everything from translating to like running information to them, just in our collective kind of experience around my brother's incarceration. Brother was incarcerated for 15 years. And so being able to be supportive and sort of walk through this process as a family. And so everything from the hope that, you know, it takes for your family to say, okay, you know, this public defender doesn't have it, but like, you know, maybe this person who's a low cost attorney does, right? And so these collection of kind of services to, this is actually a campaign that matters for young people who are behind, you know, what we say enemy lines, which is, you know, they should not be in solitary confinement, right? And so, you know, as a family advocating for that at a very young age, at 15, right? And so all of these things, you know, now I essentially do the same thing, which is that our experiences aren't just in these school buildings, but we must equip parents and we must, to be able to not just survive, but at some point really get ahead of not just the structural violence, which is what Rashida was talking about with, you know, what we're encountering when we encounter these systems, including schools, right? But also whether it be immigration and immigration detention, whether it be housing issues, all of these things, right? To also thinking about the kind of individual things that are happening in our homes, whether that also be violence, whether it be, you know, housing, food insecurity, and kind of operating both at that micro, macro level, and ultimately, you know, trying to figure out what matters, how can we run a campaign where we can get something changed at a systemic level.
Your comments highlight the fact that schools and education, period, schools are dynamic institutions. They change and evolve over time. The issues and challenges that need to be addressed around schooling change and evolve over time. And so, in Latoya and Wakwana, we have two New Orleans homegrown educators who have seen a lot of education changes over time. And so I'm wondering if you could, share something from your journey that speaks to how you've had to evolve, right, as an educator working here in New Orleans. And we'll start with Latoya.
Absolutely. I think that for me, as a product of the public school system, and then moving into the educational space as first a teacher and then a leader within the educational space, I've seen a moving away, if you will, from the traditional definition of community that was once such a prevalent part of our school system. I can remember coming up, as a little girl in high school, things of that nature. You always had this very, very strong sense of community because your teachers were a part of the community that you took part in once you went home. And the people who went to school with you, you knew them outside of the school. So they got to know you on a much, much deeper level than sometimes what I've seen evolve in school systems. Even with certain schools that were considered community-wide schools or citywide schools, citywide access schools, there was still this very strong sense of community and tradition that helped to hold together the culture of a school in order to make it a place that felt more accepting and welcoming for students and families. I think as we've evolved in our school system, that definition of community is evolving as well. So now, instead of the people who live down the block from you being the people that you go to school with, it may be someone who lives, on the other side of the city who you go to school with. But hopefully, it's a relationship that stays together over time. What has changed, and I'm not entirely certain that it's for the better, is the fact that there feels like there's this disconnect between our teaching staff and the students because you don't have that more robust interaction outside of the school and community. You've lost a little bit of that. And in losing that, you've lost some of that sense that we're all in this together, all working towards the same ends. So that's definitely something I've seen that has changed over time. I think something else that we've definitely seen, and all educators, will chime in on this, there's been a shift away from making sure that we are nurturing the entire being of a child in all aspects of their life to make sure that they're the strongest possible person that they can be. And we're so laser focused on the academic parts that we're forgetting the other pieces that help to support their growth as a whole person, that makes it that much easier for them to attain the academic achievement that we want to see with our children. Mm-hmm. So, those are the types of shifts that I'm seeing. And it causes me concern and pause as an educator, as a lifelong learner myself, as a New Orleanian, because for as much progress as we say that we've seen, I've also seen regression as well. And that always deeply troubles me because I love my city and I want our children to have the very best. And I sometimes question if we have truly gotten to a space where we're moving in the direction where we're giving them our very best.
Got it. That's really powerful. And, I think, Wakwana, when you, particularly as someone who's situated in one of the charter school networks that I think does a really great job of centering community, right, in its work. When you think about some of the changes that Latoya mentioned, and you think about the leadership development that needs to happen, to equip educators to move and shift, right? To address these new challenges. What are some of the things that have been most impactful for you, right, as a leader in the space, to be able and to be equipped to navigate some of the education changes that you've seen over time?
So one thing I think as a leader is, one thing I had to learn very quickly is political acumen. And I think that was one of the things when you asked over time what has evolved. Even being a New Orleanian, some of the politics that occurred in education didn't directly impact the classroom or get directly to the student. And now whatever decisions are happening directly impacts the students. So there's no longer that layer of the school leadership, central office. It goes from like the board to the CEO to the teacher directly to the student. So all of those layers that once were barriers for us are no longer there. So as a leader, especially in a charter world, you quickly have to learn how to navigate that space, because that impacts your school directly in terms of funding, in terms of teaching staff. We're more involved on the state level, where before you had an office that dealt with that more directly. So as a CEO, and Melanie probably can attest to this, you have to quickly learn, and LaToya, quickly learn how to navigate those spaces. So that is something that was thrown at us quickly since 2005 that we had to really embrace very quickly.
You know, and this is a great transition to kind of digging in a little bit on the leadership question, right? Because we're here to talk about women in leadership, and you mentioned this new skill set around political acumen, which I would imagine as you move higher and higher up the leadership hierarchy, that skill set becomes more and more important. And so I just want to share a few stats to kind of set the stage. So we already said that, you know, women are very, very highly represented in the education workforce. We're about 80% almost of the K through 12 education workforce. However, only 45% of principals nationwide are women. Only 24% of superintendents nationwide are women. I learned, like, as of last week, that my school principal, Miss Cynthia Calise over at McDonough 35, was actually the first woman principal of McDonough 35, and that was in the 90s. We've never had a female superintendent of New Orleans Public Schools. Let me rephrase that. We've never had a permanently appointed female superintendent of New Orleans Public Schools. And, you know, today there's only one woman of color who leads a charter management organization in the city, only one. And so when we think about women in leadership, and particularly women in leadership in New Orleans and the pipeline to leadership, I think some of these statistics sort of show that while we might have a lot of women involved in the educator workforce, as we go up and try to access these leadership positions, our presence arguably gets more scarce. And so I want to hear from, I would love to hear from some folks who are working in and around schools. Do you think it's difficult for women to move into the top leadership positions, you know, chief, president, CEO within education? And what has been your experience? So, you know, Mel, Alexina, LaToya, Wakwana, has it been difficult?
I'll chime in. I think it has been difficult, but I can speak for me personally. It was more about my own self-doubt than it was necessarily about the context of the organization. I think that as a woman, a lot of times I find myself second guessing myself, not my abilities, but my fit for, you know, what the role entails or what the job entails. And I found that to be something that I've struggled with my entire ascension through education. Always thinking that, well, maybe I'm not quite the person that they need in order to lead the organization, or maybe my skill set is not quite what they're looking for, or maybe I'm not the best person to step into that role. And I think that it's not necessarily the external voices that whisper in your ear, it's the internal voices, things that I've internalized that held me back from, you know, ascending into roles that much more quickly that I may have been perfectly suited for, but just feeling this sense that I'm not enough. And I think a lot of times our male counterparts don't necessarily have that same trepidation towards, you know, stepping into those roles of power. So that's my experience.
There's to that point, LaToya, there was a statistic about men will apply for positions if they meet 60% of the qualifications, while women will often wait to apply until they meet 100% of the qualifications. So I wonder, you know, if that in some way kind of relates to what you were sharing. Does Latoya's experience ring true for other school-based leaders here?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes we sit back and say, you know, when you look at your board and when you look at some of the people that are in the background, they're usually a bunch of men, and they will quickly support another man over you, regardless of what you're doing and how well you're doing it. Because their notion is that a man can always do it better, and a woman has to prove herself, which I wouldn't tell you what I would say, but anyway, what I said, but it's like, no, no, no. I can do this, and I really don't need you to say, oh, job well done. I know it's a job well done because the end product is it's what should speak for itself. But sometimes we, like Latoya, would second guess ourselves, and especially women of color.
Right.
Because we're the first stepping into that, or we've had a hard time to get people to say, oh, yeah, she can do that, you know. And sometimes it's almost like, a lot of times, whether I'm invited or not, I just show up. And I've learned to do that, because if I want something for my children, I have to go out and get it, because nobody's going to get it for me. Number one, I'm a female, and a female of color, you know, so I just walk in. And sometimes we have to put on mother or grandmother's drawers and just walk in.
Put on the big girl, you know.
There you go. Underwear. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And, you know, I know we have, you know, in Rashida, a researcher on the phone who, even in connection to Nola, you've done some, you know, research about Black educator experiences, and obviously a high proportion of Black women kind of talking about their experiences in the space. You know, pulling from the work that you do, pulling from your own personal experience as someone working in a non-traditional education role, in that it's not school-based, what kind of experiences have you had trying to access higher and higher levels of leadership? Is what, you know, Alexina and Latoya is sharing, does that resonate? What experiences have you had?
Well, I saw Wakwana coming off of mute, and I want to like make room. So I know, you know, I'm gonna defer to you if you need to.
Please, I love that. Thank you.
Oh no, I was just gonna respond to what both Latoya and I'm sorry, I'm gonna say Miss Medley were adding. Just about when we talk about our level of confidence, but also as women, sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves because it's not that we fear what we have to do, but sometimes it's about the perfection. And there's a difference in fear and perfection. And we always are looking for the right time to do the right thing. So is it time? Do I want to wait till the kids are older to step into this role? Or how am I going to balance going to dance practice and softball and little T and run a school? So that's what makes it difficult for us, because we're looking for the perfect time, and no time is ever going to be the perfect time. So you just, like I encourage most of the leaders, just step into it. We'll figure it out, but we have to make a decision and step into it if it's something that we want. We can't wait for the perfect opportunity, because the perfect opportunity will never come.
So my experience is like very different. Probably because I'm outside of that space, right? But what I know throughout my career is that there are many moments where I was more than qualified for leadership roles and was not even considered. I was asked to support the people who were incompetent to prepare them to be in those leadership roles, but I was being passed over. And it's part of what made me say, nope, I got to get this doctorate. Because from a career standpoint in higher education, if you don't have it, it makes it that much more difficult. But also because it's not as if the doctorate gave me so much more content knowledge. It did give me some, but what I knew already, right? It was that credential made it more possible for people to listen. Even still, I have to like beat my chest sometimes for people to hear me and to accept my leadership. It's getting less and less as I get older, but I can tell you, even for the role that I'm in, before I was in this role, I was a consultant on a project that determined whether or not this organization could exist. And when it was time for figure out who would be in leadership, nobody said a word to me. And I was like, "Oh, word, okay." And and that had happened to me lots of. I won't say it happened to me. That happened time and time again, and it was just like, so is this other person, is this whiter person, younger person with less credentials, person with less experience, is that really the right fit? Why am I not being considered for these opportunities? Until I finally was, and I think I'm doing pretty well in my role. Um, I felt and feel, based on my own experiences, but also based on some of the experiences of the teachers that, teachers and educators that I've been interviewing, or like that are part of the research that I've been doing. I find that there are many Black women in the education landscape in New Orleans who do not believe that there is support for Black women leaders. They feel like it is sometimes a toxic and abusive space, that they're asked to do any and everything, but when the opportunity comes for a promotion, they're being passed over. If they stand up and advocate for students or push back against the status quo in schools, they're being torn down. And I'm not saying that is the actual fact. I'm saying those are the experiences I'm learning about, all the way to the point where I have had people to want to join my organization, and in their interviews it comes up the trauma that they have experienced trying to navigate the space. And it's like, it's really like disheartening, because in a space where 80% of the employees in the industry are women, the fact that there are at least a cadre of women who look like me, who feel like the opportunities for leadership and growth don't exist for them, and they feel like they're being passed over. That's a reality. I think that I have to acknowledge that's a reality.
I want to.
Ren,
Oh yes, please, Mel, jump in.
real quick, I just want to name that the narrative that women are supposed to be teachers, like that has been the educational narrative. We need to change the narrative that it's, yes, you can teach, you can love to be a teacher and be a lifelong teacher, but changing that narrative that women cannot be leaders to that, yes, they can. Like when I first moved here, it was a predominantly male-driven space for your CEOs. And when I was going around meeting people trying to build community, I even had a school leader who founded a school in the city, a male, tell me specifically, "Oh, when your charter doesn't get passed, I'll offer you a job." Like, what? Because you've already dismissed me because of who I am, just showing up as a Black woman in the space. And so it's so important that we really name what the narrative is, so we can push people to change that narrative and support that change.
Can I really quickly just also like shift the narrative a bit from because of who I was? It's not because of who you are, it's because of their limitations, right? Their lens is limited. It's nothing about how you show up. I just want to push that back out there, so people, it is nothing about who we are and how we show up that's problematic. It's people's view of who we are that's the problem.
Well, on this spicy note, can I throw something in the mix? And I would love to hear from Mary on this. And then, and we're getting close to time. So Mary, I would love to hear from you on this, and anyone else who wants to weigh in. We probably have time for 2 comments. But I go on Twitter a lot, probably too much. And there's a researcher on there, Hakeem Jefferson. He's a political science professor at Stanford. And he's doing some research that basically is summed up in the following statement. Black men much more likely than Black women to endorse the view characterized by this sample survey item. If Black people carried themselves better, white people would treat them better. He calls this the attributional dimension of respectability. The reason I'm throwing this in the mix is because we're starting to talk about like some of the structures around education that create the environments that don't necessarily support the assets of diversity that Black women bring. I was very interested in this gentleman's research because it suggested that Black women leaders, and I would venture to say women of color leaders, and more generally, we know that we experience certain expectations in terms of how we need to comport ourselves, whether or not, we're showing up angry or so-called angry or aggressive. And I'm wondering if in your experience, Mary, and then I would love to hear from one or two other people, in your experience, Mary, have you ever been, accused of being aggressive or, that coded language, right? And how has that, how have you dealt with that when and if that's happened? And you can tell I'm sort of guessing that it's happened. Yeah.
I saw everybody shifting because that's exactly the name tag that they want to put on me. And that's why I say, like my grandmother who carried not this toxic masculinity, right, but divine masculine, energy. That's also, a part of our feminine energy, which is to be assertive, right, to be courageous, to be strong. And so to me, it's less about the sort of gender pieces and more about just what's in us and like the energy that we have created as women. I mean, you can't be Mother Earth and not be courageous, when like the rain's not falling, you still out here sprouting food, right? And so, so yes, I have absolutely been called, troublemaker, whatever, all of these, kind of negative connotations, which is what Rashida was talking about earlier, right? But who I am and what my energy brings is that I'm not going to be a yes person when I have to absolutely say, actually, I think this is problematic, right? And given the system and knowing that, if it was birth and the system was given birth, as with all of the isms, whether we're talking about racism, everything from uniforms to, the curriculum that's being taught to the detachment to nature and being outside and play, it's all things that we have to continue to learn how to bring into balance. And, in organizing, we say there is no nice way to make change. And so that energy is one that, we all carry when we're talking about whether it's about curriculum or whether it's about, something that's about the development of our youth, or that's about making sure that we're dismantling systems of oppression and practices that are harmful and toxic to not just the adults and the educators in the building, but most certainly the children in the building. And so, it's just a part of the our experience, not just in this work, but I don't just take off that energy when I'm not at work. It's who I am and what my being brings.
And what I hear you saying, it's an asset, right? It's an asset to doing the people facing, children serving, family serving work that we all do. We're about this conversation is amazing, and of course we do not have enough time, to cover all of the questions that we could ask. I feel like we could go another hour, but I do want to sort of end our conversation with hearing from everyone. This panel about women in leadership will be shared with students, will be shared with folks who might be considering a career in education down the line. And so my final question, and everyone will have to be fairly brief, but if you could give any advice, one piece of advice to a young woman aspiring to be a leader in education, what would it be? So I'm gonna go in order of my Zoom video and start with LaToya.
My advice would be clear on your why, because when the days get hard, that's going to be the only thing that carries you through.
I love that. Alexina?
I'd say my advice is always keep in mind your goal. And if your goal is to be at the top, never forget it, because that's where you're going to be.
I love that. Waklana?
Mine is to show up, but we always show up for other people, but to always remember to show up for yourself and to always show yourself some grace.
Yes. Mary?
I would say, fall in love, get back up when your heart gets broken. Like take that risk, take a lot of days off, play hooky, ask for a raise, like buy that expensive whatever, like lie to your boss, like do all the things, because all of those things make you who you are. And it's ultimately who you are, which is a complete human being that you bring in front of our children. And so that is important. So, just live all of those things.
So beautiful. Mel?
Find a mentor in the work, someone that can pour into you, because this work you are constantly pouring into, and we can not work from an empty cup. And so when Kara's pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Kick that glass ceiling down.
I love that. That needs to be on a t-shirt. Rashida, you got the last word. What's your advice?
I think that I don't know. I don't know what to say. I think what I'm thinking about is something I've said before, is that love and compassion have to be at the heart of this work. And that means loving the community that you serve and to serve well, right? So if this is something that you want to do, actually figure out what your values are around this work and be explicit about them. Because if you don't know, if you're not clear, you can be in craziness on the folks. So be really clear about why you want to do this. Be clear in your values, and I really encourage folks to operate from a space of love and compassion, because this here is divine work.
Oh my God. Thank you, ladies. This was amazing. I'm sorry that we could not spend more time together, but I just want to thank everyone for participating in this conversation. It was amazing. I know it'll be shared out, and we'll hear more about that from the Inspire team. I want to thank you personally for everything that you shared. I always learn so much from each of you, and that was certainly true tonight. So thank you so much. For those who might have missed part of the conversation, as I mentioned, the Inspire Nola team has recorded this. It will be circulated and shared, and you'll be getting more information about that. But to everyone who joined tonight, thank you for popping on. I hope you got as much from it as I did, and wish you a good evening and talk soon. Be safe, y'all.